Okay, this is video 2 for AP Euro. Talking about uh, Napoleon III here. Despite the economic improvements during the first decade of his reign, politically, Napoleon III had an authoritarian regime. Beginning in 1860, Napoleon began to make a number of concessions, such as the easing of censorship, in part because of the unpopularity of his wars in the Crimean region and in the Italian states. However, this liberalization had the opposite effect of what he intended. It led the people to openly display their disenchantment with his reign. Napoleon was nevertheless an effective politician. He took a bold gamble in 1859 when he declared the creation of a liberal empire, making the state a constitutional monarchy. This intriguing experiment never had the opportunity to succeed. Napoleon blundered into the Franco-Prussian War and was captured in battle. Eventually, he was sent to exile in Britain, where he soon died. Following the collapse of the Second Empire, France created what became known as the Third Republic. Right away, the Republic had to deal with the daunting task of putting down a revolt in Paris, which was resulted in the rise of the Paris Commune, a radical government created out of the anarchy brought about by the Franco-Prussian War. The Republican government restored order in Paris only after winning an armed struggle that resulted in the massacre of 25,000 Parisians. By 1875, the Republic was firmly established and consisted of a two-house parliament with a Chamber of Deputies, or a lower house, elected by universal male pool of voters, and a Senate chosen by indirect elections. The president, or head of government, was a relatively weak office, directly responsible to the Chamber of Deputies. The Third Republic would face its greatest challenge in 1889, when a coup d'etat looked probable. What became known as the Boulanger Affair severely weakened the monarchist movement, although it was marked by significant problems, such as tensions between the state and Catholic Church and the significant anti-Semitism, and the Third Republic proved to be the most durable of all of the French republics. In contrast, and this is now Great Britain. In contrast to France, Great Britain enjoyed remarkable stability and prosperity in the second half of the 19th century. A general sense of self-satisfaction pervaded in Victorian England. Nowhere was this more apparent than the Great Exhibition of 1851, which boasted more than 13,000 exhibitors displaying the variety of British goods that were now available as a result of industrialization. To accommodate the exhibits and millions of visitors, the architect John Paxson constructed a building with the greatest area of glass to date, which became known as the Crystal Palace. One contemporary wrote that because buildings represent the society that builds them, the Crystal Palace revealed the aesthetic bloom of its practical character and the practical tendency of the English nation. Politically, the nation was slowly evolving into a direction of increased democracy. The Great Reform Bill of 1832 was only the first in a number of steps that were taken to expand the franchise. In 1867, under the direction of the Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, one of the most remarkable men to ever hold the post, the Second Reform Bill passed, which extended the vote to urban heads of households. In 1884, during the prime ministership of Disraeli's greatest rival, William Gladstone, the vote was further extended to the heads of households in the countryside. The rivalry between Disraeli and Gladstone was emblematic of another important aspect of Victorian policies, the evolution of a political system dominated by two political parties, in this case, Disraeli's Tory or Conservative Party, and Gladstone's Liberal Liberal Party. The long reign of Queen Victoria saw a continuing deterioration in the political power of the monarchy, resulting in the Crown's inability to play a significant role in the selection of a prime minister, which meant that at times Victoria had to live with Gladstone as her chief minister, even though she detested him and adored Disraeli, who knew how to flatter her vanity. Russia. The stresses of war can show a nation at its best, or they can reveal significant problems. For Russia, the poor showing in the Crimean War, fought in its own backyard, revealed the backwardness of the society in comparison to the nations of the Western Europe. Although Nicholas I was far too reactionary to contemplate reform, his successor, Alexander II, recognized that the greatest problem facing Russia was serfdom. In 1861, he issued a proclamation freeing the serfs, though the former serfs had to buy their freedom with payments that were to extend over 50 years, a practice that was stopped following the Russian Revolution in 1905. The peasants were also generally given the poorest lands by their former owners, which meant that life remained harsh for many agricultural laborers. Administratively, to cope with the Russia that faced a burgeoning population throughout the far-flung empire, Alexander introduced the Zemstvos, or district assemblies, that had mandates to deal with local issues such as education and social services. The Zemstvos was dominated by the local gentry and were hardly bastions of democracy, though some Russian reformers saw the existence as a potential for greater political freedoms. Alexander enacted further reforms such as the revision of the legal system, although at heart he remained an autocrat and saw no need for implementation of fundamental changes like the ones like the introduction of a written constitution and parliamentary bodies. His intransigence on these points led to the rise of revolutionary organizations such as the People's Will, which assassinated Alexander in 1881. The succession to the throne of his reactionary son, Alexander III, brought about a new round of repression in an attempt to weaken even the tentative reforms of Alexander II. Austria. The 19th century was not kind to the Austrian Empire, a multinational empire in the age of the growing national sentiment. In 1866, the Habsburgs had lost all their territories in Italy, and their shattering defeat by the Prussians in the Battle of Sadowa made Austria no longer a factor in German affairs. In 1867, the government in Vienna found it necessary to sign an agreement with the Magyars in Hungary, creating the dual Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Each state was to be independent, but united under the mutual leadership of Francis Joseph, or Franz Joseph, who became Emperor of Austria and the King of Hungary. Perhaps not surprisingly, the Magyars, having achieved a measure of independence, turned around and did their best to ensure that the Croats, Serbs, and Romanians and their other nationalities located within Hungary would deny any form of self-rule. As a result of lessening influence in Western Europe, Austria-Hungary attempted to become more influential in the Balkan region, ultimately with disastrous consequences. All right, the Ottoman Empire. Another multinational empire at the crossroads was the Ottoman Empire, commonly referred to as the sick old man of Europe. The Ottoman state attempted in the second half of the 19th century to implement a process of modernization. This reform program, which began during the reign of Sultan Abdul Majid and was known as the Tanzimat, was an attempt to adopt Western methods of waging wars, to bring about a much-needed overhaul of the Ottoman economy, and to introduce such notions as equality before the law and freedom of religion. The introduction of Western education played a significant role in the formation of the group of people called Young Turks. You don't even know much about this. Ottoman weakness, however, continued to plague the empire until it sided with the Central Powers in the World War I. The Ottomans could do little but to sit idly by while at the Congress of Berlin, another humiliating defeat at the hands of the Russians. The other European powers recognized the independence of Serbia, Montenegro, Romania, and Bulgaria, all former Ottoman territories in the same Balkan region where the Austro-Hungarian Empire would soon have so much trouble. Okay, so we're going to stop there. Let's cover a little bit of the key concepts here. Get it pulled up. All right, Unit 6 still. Let's see. Not the second wave of industrialization yet, quite. Still doing a lot of effects of revolution here. Social effects, we did that. Concert of Europe did that. Reactions, revolutions. In Russia, autocratic leaders pushed through a program of reform and modernization, including the emancipation of serfs, which gave rise to revolutionary movements and eventually the Russian Revolution in 1905. We'll talk about that later on. Social reform. I'm going to go ahead and read this because I'm not sure we're going to get this or not. Political movements and social organizations respond to problems of industrialization. Mass-based political parties emerge as sophisticated vehicles for social, economic, and political reform. Workers established labor unions and movements promoting social and economic reforms that also developed in political parties. Feminists pressed for legal, economic, and political rights for women, as well as improved working conditions, and various non-governmental reform movements, many of them religious, and asserted the poor and worked to end serfdom and slavery. Institutional responses and reform. Liberalism shifted from laissez-faire to interventionist economic and social policies in responses to urban industrialization. I don't think we're really there yet, though. I think Unit 7 doesn't really have anything either for yet. Yeah, it's nationalism and all that. Okay, so we'll stop there.